Okay.
Okay, welcome guys to the LAR&R Junior Program. This will be your safety briefing. Please understand that safety begins with you. Each one of you is responsible not only for your own safety, but for the safety of the person next to you as well as down the range. So that means is if you see any situation that you think may be dangerous, you can all call a ceasefire individually. The range officer will listen to you, find out what the problem was. Obviously, you don't call a ceasefire unless you see something that is dangerous, which will affect everybody. Okay? The main thing to remember in firearm safety, in fact, with all firearms and any guns of any kind, anything that fires a projectile, whether it's an airsoft, a pellet gun, a BB gun, squirt gun, is that you should always treat that particular instrument as loaded at all times. That way you make no mistakes ever, because in your mind that is in fact loaded. You want it to be careful that the firearm remains unloaded until you're ready to shoot, that you keep your trigger finger off the trigger until you're on target, you've acquired the target in your sights, and you are in fact ready to shoot. I'm going to talk about the rifle. I want you to understand certain parts of it. The long part on the front is called the barrel. The part that moves is called the action. This is the bolt handle. The item that it fits into is called the stock. The front part is called the forearm. This is the butt, cheek piece, and butt stock right here. Your shoulder goes against the butt. Your cheek fits upon the cheek piece. This is called the pistol grip, the trigger, the guard, and the trigger. On the front of the barrel is a set of sights. The rear of the barrel is a set of sights. This yellow item is called a safety flag. The safety flag will be in the rifle until you're actually in shooting position, at which time you can take the safety flag out by pulling it straight out, placing it next to you. Even though you've just taken it out, you'll look into the chamber, which is the hole inside the front of the receiver. Make sure there's nothing in it. You'll check with your finger as well. Keep the bolt open. They call this action open. Action closed, the bolt goes forward and down. Then the rifle is now ready to fire. On the back, there's a loading indicator which shows by the space between it and the end of the bolt that it is now cocked and ready to shoot. Lift up the handle, pull back, the firearm cannot be fired. On these rifles, you'll see a little aluminum, piece of aluminum sticking in front of the trigger. That is another form of safety. The rifle cannot discharge unless that safety is fully pushed back by your trigger finger, at which time it can now discharge. The idea is that if the rifle was in fact loaded with a loaded round, the bolt was closed but your finger was off the trigger, that if the firearm for some reason was dropped, it could not go off. However, one of the invariable rules is never trust a mechanical safety. That's why we say safety begins with you. The front of the rifle or handgun is called the muzzle. The muzzle is the part where the projectile exits. The chamber is where you put the cartridge in. When you pull the trigger, the firing pin hits the primer ignites, burns the powder, and sends the bullet, which is the projectile, out through the muzzle. You want to keep the firearm pointed in a safe direction at all times, and you want to make sure that the muzzle of the firearm does not cross anything that you're not prepared to shoot. That means if you're hunting, It doesn't point at anything except the target that you've identified. If you're target shooting, you make sure that it stays clear of everything until it's pointed at the target that's been designated to you. What you don't want to do, and I'm going to do a demonstration, I want you to all notice the safety flag is in. This firearm cannot, the bolt cannot be closed, and it is therefore impossible to use for any other purpose except demonstration. And the reason for it is that I'm going to point this at you. You want to be very careful that you pay attention to where that muzzle is pointing so that you don't just sort of let it wander around pointing at something you're not ready to shoot. We have safe directions. Up, relatively safe. But what goes up does in fact come down. Here, if we're going to carry the firearm, we're going to carry it with two hands pointed 100% up, vertical. The reason we don't carry it in this direction, which is called port arms by the military, is because particularly if it's carried by a short person and it passes a tall person like myself, it ends up pointing at that person's head. The taller person does not appreciate that. The other safe direction is straight down. Down is relatively safe, but if the firearm discharged, you could have ricochet off the surface, dirt, gravel, concrete flying up at you, or if you were on a second floor, it could go right through the floor. The same thing why straight up is relatively safe, because if there's a floor above you, the projectile could indeed go straight through. We also have the designated downrange. Downrange is designated as safe here by the berm, which is right behind me. That's designated as safe because we know if the rifle is pointed directly at the berm, that the projectile cannot penetrate. In these particular cases, we will probably have the rifles either give to you or they will be on the sandbags or on the mat pointing downrange. If we hand it to you to carry, you'll carry it muzzle up. When you get to where it's been designated as safe, you put it and rotate it straight down so it's downrange. You will not let it wander so it's pointing at the person next to you. You need to identify your target and know what's behind it. Here we have identified the target for you because it has bullseyes on it and will have a number designated by your shooting position. We know what's behind it because we have designated it as to be safe. And you've all looked at it, you know what it's back there. It's important that the rifle stay aimed at the target underneath the planks that we have, the baffling, to keep the projectiles from going into an angle on the ground or up. Because at this range, on the other side of that safety berm, is a walking path, and a little further out is a golf course. So we still, even though we know that that is a safe spot, we still have to maintain all the safety rules of keeping the firearm pointed in a safe direction and at this range at the target, or off the target but downrange. Once you're allowed to come up to the firearm, you'll get on the ground laying behind it. You'll keep the bolt open, the action unloaded, until you have identified your target through the sights and are ready to shoot. At which point in time, with your head pressed, the cheek pressed against the cheek piece, you keep your head down. You'll take a cartridge by the base with your thumb and forefinger, insert the cartridge as if I'm doing it with the safety flag into the chamber, and push it part way in with your thumb. You'll then close the bolt by pushing it forward and down. Put your hand on the pistol grip, finger resting along the side, not on the trigger. Once you've acquired the target now, rifle is loaded, action is closed, You can then place your finger upon the trigger, hold your breath, and squeeze the trigger straight back. When the firearm goes bang, hold the trigger back for the count of 3. Let the trigger release your finger, lift the bolt. I don't want to see anyone with the bolt up and their head up. Remember, the rule here is head down. You can close the bolt, put the bolt down. If you're going to get up from the rifle or have a question, you need to move, lift the bolt handle up. At that time you can lift your head up. Once you've fired the rifle, you'll know what it feels like. There'll be a loud bang. You'll feel a very tiny bit of recoil. That is a correct shot. If, on the other hand, you've loaded it, you pull the trigger, and you hear a click, when you expect a bang, stop what you're doing, put your hand up, so that one of us can come over and check the firearm. If, on the other hand, you hear a pop instead of a bang, stop what you're doing, put your hand up. What a pop usually means is that there's just enough powder in the firearm to have moved the projectile down the barrel, but not out of the barrel. If you fired again, you could blow the firearm up by putting another projectile right down behind it. Otherwise, that's all there is to it. Does anyone have any questions? All right, remember what the rules are. Treat all firearms as loaded. Keep the firearm in an unloaded condition, although you treat it as loaded, until you're ready to use it. Keep it pointed in a safe direction. Keep your finger off the trigger until you've acquired the target and you're ready to shoot. Know your target and know what's behind it. Finally, you must maintain control of the firearm at all times. When you're on the ground, it's your responsibility. If you're going to get up, you unload it, put the safety flag in, and then you can get up from behind the rifle. Do not leave it unattended without that safety flag being in it. Any questions? Okay, thank you for your attention. This concludes your safety briefing. We can now go to the